A new paradigm in Mexico.
Mexico's projected election winner, Claudia Sheinbaum, will become the first woman president in the country's 200-year history. The climate scientist...
Mexico has elected its first female president in elections where voter turnout has been at historic levels. That's our topic this week. I'm Erdem Koch.
And I'm Ozan Ibrahim.
Welcome to Put Simply. Ozan, good to be back here on Put Simply after a bit of a break for us. It's election year, so there's always plenty to discuss. Good to see you. What's caught your attention this week?
Well, yes, it's great to be back after a bit of a long break. I guess so much has happened. It's hard to pick one thing that's caught my attention. We've had obviously elections that are coming up, in the EU this weekend as we're recording. We had the UK election date set during that period. We had the Indian elections and a surprising result there. Of course, we had the Mexican election, which we're talking about today. So it has been a very interesting and exciting time for elections, something that excites both of us. I suppose we'll go through those in the next couple of weeks and delve deeper into some of those elections. Of course, you know me, I can't not mention one of the big stories that we've had in the last week, and that is the former president Donald Trump being found guilty of 34 counts by a New York court and by a jury of his peers in the last week. Obviously, this is a historic occasion where first time a former president has been convicted of I would like to say a felony, but 34 of them. It's certainly likely to have quite an impact on the election. You've had a couple of opinion polls come out in the last week or so since the announcement, since the decision was brought down by the jury. And, there's certainly Trump's numbers are starting to slowly go down. Obviously, we're 5 months out of an election. You can't put too much weight on these numbers, particularly after such a big historic decision and historic news item like that. But it certainly has shifted the narrative, I think. Trump famously saying that he could be on, Fifth Avenue and commit murder and that, nothing would stick to him or, that wouldn't change his supporters supporting him, etc. And that's true. I think his hardcore supporters and his base will and have seen this as some sort of conspiracy against Trump and some sort of political weaponization by Biden. But certainly the people who matter in this election that's coming up, and those are people who have yet to make up their mind, those who are independents, etc. Certainly, this won't go down well with them. And all of the polling is showing that they are a group of Americans who are very concerned about electing a convicted felon. So it's very interesting. Obviously, we won't go too much into the details of the case, but it I think is going to have quite an impact. And over the next upcoming weeks, we will look further into that and do a bit of a US election update.
It's definitely fascinating. I mean, it's it's the gift that keeps giving, US politics, and we said that at the start of the year. In fact, on our first episode on Put Simply, when we covered the Iowa caucuses, where Trump obviously had a fantastic win for himself. Let's see what the impact is. There is nothing stopping him from running or being elected. It's beyond comprehension of how the US politics game plays out. But for me, it was something not politically related and actually sport related, and a lesson in PR as well. The Turkish women's national volleyball team, which are number one in the world and have been number one in the world for quite some time, were traveling over to the United States from Turkey to compete in a national competition there. As they boarded their flight from Istanbul on a Turkish Airlines flight, they were all in economy class. When they were in economy class, they started tweeting photos of them. Now, we're talking about volleyball players, right? So they're pretty tall. And because they're tall, obviously, being in economy and because they're, the Turkish national team, this drew a lot of attention and a lot of backlash immediately to Turkish Airlines, with effectively people saying, well, how dare Turkish Airlines not put the stars of the country in at the very least business class. Ironically, earlier the same day, the Turkish domestic football team's champions, who weren't champions at the time, Galatasaray, had just tweeted that a big thank you for Turkish Airlines flying us over on a charter flight to a place that was an hour and 15 minutes on a domestic flight. These women were flying from Istanbul to the US, a 15-hour flight in economy, representing the country. Immediately what happened is Turkish Airlines tweeted from their spokesperson, and then their entire C-suite tweeted saying, well, we're not to blame here. The Turkish Volleyball Federation should have got in touch with us. We don't just, suddenly have 15 business class seats available. And this whole blame game started between the Volleyball Federation and the Turkish Airlines sort of corporate communications suite. And it just wasn't going down well for Turkish Airlines, right? Because of the contrast with the men's team and what was happening with the women's team. So it was just Turkish Airlines being really, really defensive. Now, the women went over to the US. They defeated every team there, performed miraculously, incredibly. For those of you who enjoy watching volleyball, it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. And they flew back business class, of course, which is really the only thing Turkish Airlines had to do from a PR perspective. They just had to tweet saying, we don't know how this has happened. We don't know who is responsible. It's not us, but it actually doesn't matter. We guarantee you that we will make up for this on the way back. That is it. Leave it at that. Once you start defending the indefensible, and once that tide of opinion turns against you, there's no coming back from that. And Turkish Airlines communications staff should have known better. Speaking of women, it's been a very interesting turn of events, let's say, although somewhat expected, but definitely one that is interesting, that has caught our attention, and that is what has happened in Mexico. The country has elected its first female president over the weekend, and we want to know more about this. And for that, we're joined by Stephane Michel. He's an accomplished professional. He wears many hats. He's worked as a public affairs consultant and director. He's worked as a corporate advisor, a political commentator, as well as a business owner in the hospitality sector. He's currently the president of ASEAN Development. It's a luxury hotel company. And he's also the chairman of the ASEAN Mexico Council for Foreign Trade. He has a wealth of knowledge when it comes to the Mexican political landscape, as well as the country's foreign affairs policies. So, what a better person to have here this week on Put Simply. And he joins us from his home city of Bangkok in Thailand.
Stephane, welcome to Put Simply. Great to have you on our show. Could you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. I'm currently president of ASEAN Development, which is one of the leading luxury developers in Southeast Asia. However, my background really originally was in public affairs. And as life goes through its mysterious ways, I am now in luxury development, yet still strongly involved in anything related to Trans-Pacific trade and public affairs as well, especially between Mexico and Southeast Asia.
Now, as you're aware, 2024 is the year of elections, and we're very excited to dive deeper into the Mexican elections. We've covered a lot of elections over the last few months, have said a lot about the US election, etc. So it's good to kind of go down south a little bit more and talk about the Mexican elections. But before we do that, Stephane, could you give us a bit of a top-line summary about your country? Some of the demographics, the major industries, the political system, so that our listeners who may not be aware about Mexico can get a bit of an understanding.
Sure. Mexico sits sandwiched between Canada, the US, and Central America, so right there. Our population sits at about 130 million right now. We're the 12th largest economy in the world. We're the largest Spanish-speaking country in the world, currently, and the 10th most populated country. In terms of GDP, our economy is second behind Brazil in Latin America, with our GDPs at around 1.4, 1.45 trillion. So definitely very much ahead of the rest of Latin America and playing, like I said, in the top. We sit at number 12, depending on the year, but very interesting. We're the country with the most free trade agreements in the world. We are members of the CPTPP, which was formerly the Trans-Pacific Alliance, though since the US did not ratify that, the rest of the countries ratified it, and so it became the CPTPP. We're also now members of MICTA, which is Mexico, Indonesia, Korea, Turkey, and Australia, which has become quite an active group as of late. And of course, we're members of the USMCA, which is the free trade agreement formerly known as NAFTA, between the US, Mexico, and Canada, which makes us a very strong economic bloc. In terms of our political system, we follow a federal system. We have a presidential federal system. So we have a president. We do not have a vice president, unlike many Latin American countries. We have a very strong cabinet in lieu. We're decentralized in the sense that our states hold their own elections for their governors, their mayors, so on and so forth, and also elect their senators, to the upper house. We have an upper house and a lower house, similar to the US system in a way, although it is a direct election. But in terms of having the way the national representation works, similar to the US system, except we do direct election, national election, without an electoral college.
Well, speaking of elections, Stephane, obviously Mexico has been in the news after the election of the first female president, Claudia Sheinbaum, on June 2, in what has been described by many observers as a historic landslide. In fact, she's the first woman to win a presidential general election when you look at the North Americas in the US and Canada. So kudos to the Mexicans. Can you tell us a little bit about the new president and what she and her centre-left coalition stand for from a political perspective?
So Claudia Sheinbaum is really a very interesting card. She mixes politics and science and society in her background. It's very interesting. She's not only the first woman to be elected in the obviously in Mexico, but also in the also within the NAFTA bloc, US and Canada as well. And to make it more interesting, she's also Jewish, which in a country where 90% of the population is Catholic is quite interesting. So her coalition's mostly made up of, the Morena party, which has been in power for the past going on 6 years. They came to power under Andrés Manuel López Obrador, otherwise known as AMLO, who's the current president. And well, there are a lot of high hopes on the future. People want to see. It's been a very interesting period. Mexico went from a basically single party political system under the PRI, which ruled Mexico for over 80 years, to transitioning with the right under President Fox for a few years. Then the PRI came back, and then the left, which is Morena, came out of nowhere with a very extreme landslide victory as well last time. Yeah, so it's been very interesting. This will be the evolution of the left in power.
Put simply, how significant is this victory for Mexico, and was this result expected?
The result was somewhat expected, although there was a large part of the, I would say, upper middle class that was very much convinced that runner-up would be able to close the gap. Although in the end, we saw that Claudia Sheinbaum ended at 59%, and candidate Xochitl ended up at just under 28%. So it's a very extreme gap. I think there's a big gap between different groups in Mexican society currently. Mexico is living a transition, a deep transition. When the left won, this was very shocking to the business community. Given what had happened in the rest of Latin America, people were afraid, etc. Now it's been a few years. We're going on 6 years, like I said earlier. And so far, the Mexican peso has appreciated. It's been one of the strongest currencies in the world, due in large part to the situation of the decoupling from China and the geopolitics linked to that situation between the United States and China. Nearshoring has now, put us on the map, contending for all the companies that have left China in manufacturing and services, with our only competitor really being Southeast Asia, especially Vietnam. So the economy's been doing very well. We've broken all our FDI numbers so far. So it's been quite interesting and unexpected. Although there are major challenges. I mean, the security aspect in the country, national security, security at the ground level has deteriorated, which I think is the most stressful point for the upcoming administration.
Stephane, you mentioned the gap between President-elect Sheinbaum and her main opposition candidate, who was also a female candidate. Why do you think the opposition underperformed so significantly?
As I said, I think Mexico's in transition right now. It's in deep reflection, transition. The new generations don't think the same as before, and they want things. We're living in a modern world with interconnectivity, and whatnot. And I just think that people are now becoming a lot more critical of their leaders. And basically, Xochitl represented the PRI, which was the party that ruled Mexico for years, the PAN, which then came, and basically, based on their performance, the PRA came back, which was very unlikely when the PAN took over. No one could imagine the PRI would ever come back. And then the PRD, which is basically was the main, third party and challenger to the PRI and the PAN, which is actually where Andres Manuel López Obrador, AMLO, he's from. Now he split and formed Morena as his own party after. So you basically have the party that ruled the country for over 80 years. Then you have, which is, center, left, right, everything within one. It's a very old school party. And then you have the PAN, which is definitely more on the right, conservative, who, were given the chance. And they did hold two presidential terms with Fox and Calderon. And then the PRD, which is what's left of the left. And so it doesn't make for such a strong challenger. I would say you've got the Morena's been in power for 6 years. Depending on who you ask, some things are better than others, but they like I said, the peso's stronger than ever against the US dollar. We have extreme influx of FDI and other things. So I would say that besides the security situation, which is a major situation, everything else within reason is going all right. And so it would be very difficult to challenge that, I would say, if you're the incoming candidate. So it was to be expected that she would be the one to beat. And it's difficult. Honestly speaking, I believe the upper echelons of the middle class and above, a lot of them are still holding on to the image of Morena as a populist party, which really that was their image when they came to power. But it's now a mixed bag. Within the ranks of Morena, you have every kind of person from every kind of background, including from the upper echelons of society now. So you have a bit of everything. So it's made it very interesting. But I would say that, like I said, the country's in transition, and there is a definite disconnect between the upper echelons of society and the lower ones, combined with the new generation. The new generation doesn't want to have anything to do with the past parties, with what they represent, with what they did. In a way, it's, hey, you were given a chance, one of you for 80 years. I think, you had your airtime, so to speak, and then the PAN came with the entire world behind them, and the long live democracy. They came into power, and it was really a great moment. A lot of very educated Mexicans that have been overseas. There'd been a sort of brain drain. They came back, It was a magical moment, I'd say, when the PAN won. And, 12 years later, we had a major situation, security situation with, multinational criminal organizations in positions of power the way they had never held them in modern society, I would say. And so this created a very bad situation. So basically, the the youth, the Mexican youth that's on YouTube and all that, they don't have anything to do with the past. They're like, look, Mexico is terrible. Let's try to get better, and let's at least give these people a chance. That combined with the left that came in very strong before makes it quite complex for anyone to challenge. I believe they will be challenged in the future, but that was not going to be in this election, and definitely not under these traditional kind of flags, I would say.
You've done a great job of kind of segmenting the various different parts of the Mexican electorate and also touching on some of the kind of issues that were I suppose at play. Can you drill a bit deeper into when Mexicans were going to the polls on June 2nd? What kind of resonated in their mind? I mean, I think it's very interesting that there was quite a contrast between the two candidates. But what were the top issues on Mexican voters' minds, and what were the, I suppose, candidates? How were they trying to appeal to the voters on some of those issues?
Well, Claudia Sheinbaum was appealing by saying, we've been doing a good job. We have lots to do. We're transforming the country. I would say that's the speech basically, and there's a lot to do, and we're still trying to clean house, so to speak, which is, you know, their speech, not mine, but cleaning house of the past and, drain the swamp, as the Americans would say. So that was the speech. Now on Xochitl's camp was more people being very worried still 6 years later. Oh, is this a communist takeover? And also they want to change the constitution, which is a big issue right now, especially with an almost supermajority coming in. Are we going to lose our houses? Now this happened years ago. I had people telling me, oh, they're going to seize our houses. This is going to become Venezuela. And, we're going to lose everything. I'm moving immediately if the left wins. I recently told a friend of mine who's very close to the winning candidate. I think, she was pretty bent out of shape about about a lot of people in her societal, let's say, level criticizing her. And I said, listen, honestly speaking, they all said they were going to move. And, I keep asking them, what's your new address? Did you relocate? Because I'd love to, send you a Christmas card. And no one did. So I just think this is the problem. I think a lot of people are holding on to the past. It hasn't been a perfect administration by any means, but it's just, I think people are trying to move forward, not backward. And everyone's been given a fair chance. And now the left is in power. They won again. And I definitely think that what they don't want to see, people don't want to see, is the mistakes of the past coming back again because they still haven't learned their lesson. The speech is still the same. Um, so it's more of a social movement. So it's not that it doesn't favor business and the economy, but it's been a social movement with a lot of people, marginalized in the past in Mexico. And I think this is why they won by a landslide last time, and they've done it again. Now, that doesn't happen unless there are serious social issues. This is clear. So I think what's on the voters' mind in this election? Well, the people voting for Claudia, everything's not great, but hopefully it gets better and we're okay. We definitely don't want to go back to where we were. This is clear, and I think that the people voting for Xochitl, where we have to get these people out at any cost because they've disrupted, the fabric of who we've been, and which in some aspects I understand as well. I understand it hasn't been super pro-business, which is separate from the FDI situation coming in on the border and the manufacturing. So I think there has to be balance found in the middle. Hindsight is always 2020. as they say. And I haven't mentioned Jorge Maynez, who's the third candidate from the citizens movement, who did win with 10% of votes, and considering that they don't remotely have the money that the other two candidates had, I believe that this is very significant and needs to be underlined as well. And this is part of the future of the country, the third candidate, as a party. So there is a strong third voice that, just went at it on their own. And I think it's important. Those are real people who want major change, and they don't want to have anything to do with it's not about the left or the right or anything. This is something new. A lot of young people in that party. So need to keep an eye on them for the future.
It's interesting you mentioned the young and an eye to the future as well, Stephane, because you see particularly in the West, right, this erosion of trust in politics, erosion of trust in institutions, erosion of trust in the media and whatnot. And this has often led to, low voter turnout and apathy amongst the youth, etc., etc. In Mexico, it's been a very different story over the weekend. We saw, an incredible voter turnout. We saw people turned away from consulates in the US, where obviously, the citizens of Mexico could go and vote. What was the reason, do you think? Is it because of the desire for change and this incredible, I guess, spark of interest in where the country is heading, or is there something else that you can point to?
I think there's definitely a desire for change. I think all the people supporting the left don't want to go back to the old ways. And so they had to come with the most, active turnout ever. And on the flip side, Xochitl supporters as well, they were hoping this is where they make their stand. And, they made a strong stand. It's not something to frown upon that you get 28% of the electorate in a country the size of Mexico. So they had major turnout. I also think they were quite late in the campaign, on the campaign trail. Xochitl didn't start gaining real momentum, I would say, until, maybe just a couple of months before the election. People were really talking about her nonstop. And, I think at the beginning when she came out, people were interested, and okay, I mean, we know her, if you're a middle class and above Mexican, Xochitl, and people know her basically, and it's good. In a sense, they believe, she's one of us, something like that. This is the mindset in those segments of society. And then it died down. And the thing is that Claudia Sheinbaum's campaign started strong from day one, and they did not slow down until the very last day. And so that obviously brought huge turnout. And then Xochitl, she gained strong momentum at the end. People thought she's going to close the gap. She did. She was down to about 20% and hit close to 30. So they did have a dramatic increase in votes compared to where the polls from the major polling groups put her just a few weeks before the election. So I think, but back to your original point, I think it really has to do with people are genuinely worried about Mexico. What's the future? I mean, we're this very big country with massive potential, even as it is, even with everyone from both sides talking about all the problems we face and challenges, most of them being true, we're still the 12th economy in the world, you see? And at 130 million population, we're a massive consumer market. I mean, it's interesting, right? So, and we're a modern country. We've elected we're very open-minded. You can clearly see it. We've elected a Jewish woman to lead our country. Mexico being, up until not long ago, well, we're still conservative, but we're conservative, extremely predominantly Catholic, 90%. So this goes to show you that Mexico's changing, and we're also very open-minded and educated in many ways, because this has to do with education also, open-mindedness and whatnot. I mean, we still have a ways to go, but this is I would say a very good start. This shows that we're quite advanced on that front, I would say.
Obviously, the world media has focused very heavily on the presidential election and its outcome. But of course, during the weekend, the elections were also held for the legislature. Could you put simply for us some of the results that came out of that election and what that means for President-elect Sheinbaum's government and also for the country?
Well, Morena, Claudia Sheinbaum's party, took the majority in the Congress, and though they did not get the supermajority in the Senate, they will be able to maneuver very easily now, I believe, in the legislative in general, since having that type of power in Congress as well as the Senate, because they didn't get majority, but they were almost there. So they will definitely be able to probably come to agreements when it comes to some of the interesting legislation that they're proposing now. So I think this will give. Let's just put it this way: she'll be a president with full power, which means, from a positive point of view, she'll have full power to transform the country in a positive way, full support, which not many leaders get a chance to have or be in a position such as that.
Let's look at the ramifications of the election results for beyond the Mexican border, and particularly with its northern neighbor and major trading partner, the United States. Could you put simply what this victory means for relations between Mexico and the US? And how is it likely to impact some of the major issues that we've seen between the two countries, particularly around, immigration, drug trafficking, and free trade?
Well, I mean, the Mexico and the U.S. have a shared destiny. I think, one day we're on good terms, the next we're, sore, then we're on better terms. This goes back and forth, but at the end of the day, we're very, very much intertwined. Our futures, we share a border, a huge border, and many other things, as well as a very large Mexican American population and whatnot. And now, with blocs such as the European Union and Asia, somewhat to some degree, you've got ASEAN as a quasi bloc, and well, China on its own and Japan. So with NAFTA, including Canada, that on the trade side, it makes our supply chains are completely interdependent on each other. Um, there are a lot of things manufactured in Canada and the US and Mexico. It just depends on the types of goods. But within the supply chain, it's you'd be very surprised. It's really the level to which it's integrated and interdependent, especially uh, regarding your question. So then we've got elections coming up in the US, which Mexico is watching very closely. Under the PRI traditionally had a very good relationship with the US government. I think relations in general in modern times in the past 30, 40 years had been pretty good. With the PAN, they were also very good. Under the left, it's been a bit difficult, not difficult, but different. I think like I said, it's socially driven. So when you have a socially driven agenda, it changes the priorities a bit. Although USMCA was, finalized under the administration of Andres Manuel López Obrador, though this was mostly negotiated by the previous administration. So the relationship over the course of the past few years, I would say just okay. Not bad, and it hasn't been the best relationship in history, definitely not. But like I said, we're completely interdependent and intertwined. So we'll have to see. I do think that this incoming administration will be a bit more trade focused. And, as the social agenda objectives are met or adjusted, then things will be shifting in that direction, which should improve relations on some fronts. I think on cooperation on the fight, let's say, against drug trafficking and whatnot. I think that should improve. I expect it to improve. I would hope it improves. But who wins will also have a lot to do with it. We'll have to see. a lot of the issues between U.S. and Mexican relations over the past few years had a lot to do, before Biden, had to do with, former President Trump's very undiplomatic comments towards Mexico and Mexicans and, these kind of things. And so it's been stabilized under Biden, I would say. And so we'll have to see if President Trump is elected. We'll have to see where that takes us. He will definitely be facing a president with the full support of her country and its Congress and its Senate. And so they'll have to find a way to coexist. But given the situation now, especially the geopolitical front in East Asia, I think there'll be too many shared factors from a national security point of view that will probably bring the two countries closer, no matter what, I believe.
You mentioned East Asia there, Stephane, and you mentioned at the start when you were introducing yourself that you're active in foreign relations between Southeast Asia and Mexico. What do you think of the impact that this election result will have, particularly that pro-trade, pro-business focus that you believe the new president and her administration is likely to have? The impact, as you foresee it, on the relations between the ASEAN region and Mexico. What can you say about that?
So first and foremost, I think I'd say that I believe relations between Mexico and the world in general will improve. Relations are set to get even better. They're very good. The relationship between Mexico and Southeast Asia is very good because a lot of the countries share our same challenges, and we're all developing economies. When you look at Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand, and obviously our old friends from the Philippines, who were under the same previous colonial system. So I think the relations will become not better, but more active would be the word. And that goes for the rest of the world. Relations have been good, but now they'll be more active as we move away maybe from insular, Mexico focused program to, okay, it's time to see what else everyone is up to and see how we contribute and show them what we've been up to and etc. So I think that's how the relationship looks for the coming. Definitely, I expect a major increase in activity on the foreign relations front in the first couple of years of this incoming administration to kind of say, look, we're back on the world stage in a very strong way. When you're the 12th economy in the world, that has a lot of implications. And so, it's especially with regards to our very clear leadership role in Latin America vis-a-vis the US, but also on the world stage, things like this. And with MICTA gaining more traction with our Turkish friends and Australia and Korea, Indonesia, you should see a lot of activity there. And with ASEAN, obviously, our trade with ASEAN has increased dramatically over the course of the past decade, and will continue to do so.
Stephane, you've done a great job of unpacking a lot of topics there. Thank you very much for that. When we cover elections, we usually finish with a prediction from our guests. But of course, in this case, the results are already in. So we'd like a different prediction from you on another topic that I know you know well. You're my go-to person on a lot of things, but certainly on this topic, you're my number one go-to person. The prediction that we would like you to comment on is, when is mezcal going to overtake tequila as Mexico's number one export and drink of choice for those of us outside of Mexico?
So that's a very good question. I don't think they're close, but there are two reasons for that. Is that tequila has been exporting for many, many more years than mezcal. The industry is much better organized, and it's a lot, tequila's become a large part of the tequila industry's become quite industrialized, whereas mezcal is still very craft. So that's the first challenge, I would say, just to reach those kind of the manufacturing scale of where the tequila industry would be challenging, is challenging, and also just from the whole process, the manufacturing process itself. Now, tequila has experienced exponential growth, and this has gone on for the past 20 years. If you look at the numbers, it's shocking. I would dare say no drink or maybe one other drink has experienced the exponential growth, such as whiskey, that tequila's experienced, especially in the U.S. market. And mezcal as well. You know, mezcal has been growing almost 20% per year the past 5 years. So that's huge growth. You can imagine the mezcal brand owners being very happy campers right now. Yeah, let's not compare because the tequila has been in the market for many, many years, way ahead of mezcal. But mezcal should hit, I believe, the $1 billion sales mark as a whole soon, which will be a major milestone, and that's expected to happen sometime in 2025 or 26, which, you know, will be the first major milestone. I mean, that marks the big leagues, definitely. So they won't overtake them anytime soon. Mezcal is a much more craft product. You know, in mezcal you can find many different varieties of agave, whereas tequila is traditionally produced with Weber agave, one type of agave. So it makes things just, yeah. I would say mezcal is the very distant craft hipster cousin of tequila. So it'll take a while. It might take a couple decades for them to get up to that level.
I'm far from being a hipster, but I'm a recent convert to mezcal. So I look forward to mezcal, increasing its growth around the world. And we're going to have to get you back, Stephane, to do a whole episode on the difference between the two. I know you have a keen interest, and you've been involved in
Sure.
that industry for a very long time. But we've run out of time. Thank you very much for joining, Put Simply, and sharing all your insights on, I suppose, what can only be described as an exciting and hopeful time in your country. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a good one.
And that's been this week's episode of Put Simply. Be sure to follow us on LinkedIn at Oroka Group to stay up to date with all the latest episodes and news. Feel free to leave a comment and suggestions on what you'd like to see featured on the podcast as well. Until next time, I'm Erdem Koch.
And I'm Ozan Ibrahim.
Thanks for listening.